She had 20 minutes. 20 minutes to tell a complete stranger everything about her broken life. Her failed relationships. Her mounting debts. Her bone-deep fear that she was failing her 5-year-old daughter. She poured it all out, every insecurity, every desperate moment, every shameful thought she'd ever had about not being good enough. And then, she found out who he really was. When those words left his mouth, when he told her his name, her entire world stopped spinning. Imagine this, you're a single mother. You've applied to 52 jobs. 52. Everyone rejected you. Your car breaks down on the most important morning of your life. Your babysitter cancels. Your daughter is sick. You're literally falling apart in the pouring rain, holding your baby, wondering if this is the day you finally fail. Then a black SUV pulls up. A stranger offers you a ride. You don't know it yet, but that ride is about to change everything about your life. But here's where it gets insane. The man she thought was just helping her? He was actually the CEO of the company she was about to work for. The billionaire CEO. The man with the power to end her career before it even started. And he was about to find out something about her that would make him do the most unexpected thing. A kindness so profound it would rebuild her entire life. An act of grace so rare that it would prove one thing. Sometimes the person you need most is disguised as the person you least expect. This is the story of Emma Carter. A woman invisible to the world. A woman who thought her life was over. And the man who reminded her that miracles actually happen. If you've ever felt invisible. If you've ever wondered if you deserved a second chance. If you've ever doubted whether anyone would see you for who you really are, stay with me. Because what happens next will change the way you see everything. But first, if you believe in second chances, if you believe that one act of kindness can transform a life, hit that like button right now. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your life? Was it an accident? Or was it fate? And if you don't want to miss what happens next, subscribe now. Because this story isn't just about finding love. It's about remembering your own worth. It started on a morning that felt like it might break her. The alarm didn't go off. Or maybe it did, and Emma Carter was already too exhausted to hear it. Either way, she woke to something that every single parent fears. The sound of her daughter coughing. Not a normal cough. The kind that reaches into your chest and reminds you that you're responsible for another human being's survival, and you're barely surviving yourself. Sophie was 5 years old. She should have been thinking about birthday cake and cartoons and which stuffed animal to take to daycare. Instead, she was fighting through another cold that wouldn't leave, and Emma was fighting through the paralyzing fear that she couldn't afford the medicine to help. She looked at the clock, 5:47 a.m. She looked at her phone, 2 missed calls from her car insurance company. 3 past due notices. 1 message from her babysitter, I can't make it today. Emergency with my mom. So sorry. And 1 notification that made her stomach drop, her car. It wouldn't start. Again. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, a mattress she'd bought used 3 years ago, and did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She cried. But the crying lasted exactly 45 seconds. Because that's all the time Emma Carter could afford to fall apart. She had a job starting today. Her first real job in 2 years. A position at Westlake Industries, a company so massive that just working there felt like a dream someone else was having, not her. The interview had been a blur. She'd been so careful, so desperate to seem capable, so terrified of showing any crack in the facade that she'd almost convinced them, and herself, that she had it all together. They'd called her back. They'd offered her the position. As an administrative assistant in the upper departments. It paid more than anything she'd ever made. It came with benefits, insurance, actual health insurance that could help Sophie. This was it. This was the moment everything could change. But only if she made it to that office by 8 a.m. It was 5:47 a.m. Her car wouldn't start. Her babysitter had abandoned her. And she was a single mother in a rainstorm with no backup plan. That's when Emma made a decision. She got up. She showered. She helped Sophie into the faded pink coat, a hand-me-down from her friend's daughter, and she bundled that sick little girl into her arms. She was going to get to that office. No matter what it took. She was going to survive this morning. The rain was relentless. Not gentle. Not peaceful. The kind of rain that feels personal, like the sky itself was testing her. Emma stood on the corner of 5th and Maple, soaking wet, her old leather bag pressed to her chest like it could protect her from everything she couldn't control. Sophie clung to her, small and shivering and still coughing. Emma pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked, had been cracked for 6 months because she couldn't afford to fix it. But the Uber app still worked. Barely. She booked a ride. A black SUV. 3 minutes away. 3 minutes. She could survive 3 more minutes. She whispered to Sophie that everything would be okay. That they were going to get to the office. That Mommy had a plan. She didn't have a plan. But Sophie didn't need to know that. Then the black SUV turned the corner. And everything that was supposed to happen next never happened the way Emma expected. To understand what was about to happen to Emma Carter, you need to understand what her mornings looked like. Not just this morning. Every morning. She woke up the same way most struggling single mothers do, before her alarm. Before the sun. In that dark, quiet space between sleep and panic where your brain finally catches up to all the things you haven't solved yet. 5:47 a.m. That's when Emma's eyes opened. Not because she was rested. Not because she wanted to. But because her body had learned, over years of barely making it, that sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford to oversleep. She had 45 minutes before Sophie needed to be awake. 45 minutes to gather herself. To put on the face of someone who had it together. To pretend just for a few hours that she wasn't drowning. But then came the sound. The cough. Not a light cough. Not the kind you clear your throat and move on from. This was the kind of cough that came from deep in Sophie's small chest. The kind that woke her up, scared and confused, wondering why her body was betraying her before the sun even rose. Emma didn't think. She just moved. She was out of bed in seconds, padding across the small apartment. And when I say small, I mean Sophie's little cot was visible from Emma's mattress on the floor. This wasn't a home with separate rooms. This was survival in 400 square feet. This was a mother and daughter pressed so close together that their struggles had become inseparable. Sophie was sitting up, rubbing her eyes, coughing so hard her whole tiny body shook. And Emma's heart broke in that moment. Not metaphorically. Actually broke. Because here's what no one tells you about being a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Every illness your child gets is a financial catastrophe. Not a light cough. Not the kind you clear your throat and move on from. This was the kind of cough that came from deep in Sophie's small chest. The kind that woke her up, scared and confused, wondering why her body was betraying her before the sun even rose. Emma didn't think. She just moved. She was out of bed in seconds, padding across the small apartment. And when I say small, I mean Sophie's little cot was visible from Emma's mattress on the floor. This wasn't a home with separate rooms. This was survival in 400 square feet. This was a mother and daughter pressed so close together that their struggles had become inseparable. Sophie was sitting up, rubbing her eyes, coughing so hard her whole tiny body shook. And Emma's heart broke in that moment. Not metaphorically. Actually broke. Because here's what no one tells you about being a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Every illness your child gets is a financial catastrophe. Every fever is a decision. Do I take off work and lose the hours, or do I send her to daycare and hope she gets better? Every medication is a math problem where you're calculating which bills you can skip this month. Emma had already spent the money she didn't have on medicine. Twice. The cold kept coming back. It refused to leave. And there was nothing left in the budget for another doctor visit. So she did what she always did. She held Sophie. She whispered that everything was going to be okay. And she lied, not with words but with the steadiness of her presence. Because her daughter needed to believe that her mother had a plan. That her mother could fix this. That her mother was strong enough to carry both of them. Sophie finally settled, nestled against Emma's chest, still coughing but calmer. It was 6:12 a.m. Emma had 28 minutes. She moved through the morning like she was walking through water. Shower, water as cold as she could stand it because hot water meant paying more. Clothes, the navy dress she'd bought at a thrift store for the interview. It was a size too big, but she'd found a belt, and it looked professional enough. It had to be. Hair, pulled back tight because she didn't have time for it to air dry, and she couldn't afford the electricity to use a blow dryer. Makeup, minimal because she'd learned years ago that every product counted. Just enough to look put together. Just enough to pass. Sophie woke up as Emma was getting ready. The little girl stumbled into the bathroom, still half asleep, still coughing. Emma helped her brush her teeth. A ritual they did together every morning, one of the few normal things in a life that felt anything but normal. Then came the moment Emma had been dreading. Mommy, where's Miss Patricia? Miss Patricia was the babysitter. She was supposed to pick Sophie up at 7:30 and take her to daycare. Except Emma's phone had buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with a message that made her stomach drop. Emergency with my mom. Can't make it today. So sorry. So sorry. Emma's mind raced through her options and each one was a dead end. Call someone else? There was no one else. Her mother was gone. She had no siblings nearby. Her friends were all working, the few she still had after years of being too exhausted to maintain friendships. Find another babysitter? At 6:47 a.m.? On the day of her new job? Miss daycare and take Sophie with her? But the daycare didn't open until 9 a.m. Her job started at 8 a.m. She'd be late before she even arrived. Emma felt something cold and dark rise up in her chest. Fear. Real fear. She was about to lose this job. She could feel it. She hadn't even started yet and it was already slipping away. Then, as if the universe wanted to test her one more time, there was another sound. Her car keys sitting on the counter and her trying to turn it on. The engine made a sound like a creature gasping for breath. And then, nothing. The car wouldn't start. Emma sat in the driver's seat for exactly 10 seconds, hands gripping the steering wheel, and she felt the last thread holding her together begin to fray. 7:02 a.m. She had 58 minutes to get to an office across the city. Without a car. Without childcare. With a sick 5-year-old and a broken phone and dreams that were dying in real time. That's when Emma made the decision that changed everything. She looked at her phone. She opened the Uber app. Her hands were shaking as she entered her destination, Westlake Industries. Downtown. Across the city. She looked at the price. It was almost $40. She had $38 in her account. She booked it anyway. Because sometimes when you're drowning, you don't think about the cost of being rescued. You just reach for anything that might keep you from going under. The notification came through. Your ride will arrive in 4 minutes. A black SUV. Emma grabbed Sophie. She grabbed her worn leather bag. She wrapped the little girl in a faded pink coat, a hand-me-down that had belonged to her friend's daughter, and she stepped out into the pouring rain. And she waited. For the black SUV. For whatever came next. For the moment that would change everything. The rain didn't stop. If anything, it got heavier. Emma stood on the corner of 5th and Maple, her phone glowing through the cracked screen, refreshing obsessively. 1 minute away. The app said 1 minute away. Sophie was pressed against her leg, the stuffed rabbit, the one with the half-torn ear, clutched in her small fist. The little girl wasn't complaining. She'd learned young not to complain. Complaining meant her mother had to worry about her on top of everything else. So instead, Sophie just stood there. Silent. Coughing occasionally. Waiting. Emma refreshed her phone again. Still 1 minute away. But then she saw it. A black SUV turning the corner through the rain. It moved slowly, deliberately, like it knew exactly where it was going. The windows were tinted. The paint was gleaming despite the downpour. It was the kind of car that made Emma feel small just looking at it. The kind of car that represented everything she wasn't. Everything she didn't have. Everything she was fighting to give to Sophie. The SUV slowed as it approached the corner. Emma's heart jumped. She pulled up her app on the cracked screen. She checked the license plate number that glowed against the rain-wet night. It matched. It was her ride. Relief flooded through her like warmth on a freezing morning. The kind of relief that comes when you think you're going to break and suddenly something catches you. She opened the back door before the driver could even fully stop. She helped Sophie into the leather seat, leather so soft it felt almost unreal, and slid in beside her, fastening the little girl's seatbelt with trembling fingers. The car smelled like expensive cologne mixed with rain. It smelled like everything Emma's life wasn't. The driver didn't turn around. She could only see him in the rearview mirror. A glimpse of a tailored suit. Dark hair damp from the rain. Hands that looked like they'd never done manual work a day in their life. And then Emma started talking. Not because the driver asked, but because she did what nervous, desperate people do. She filled the silence. Thank you so much for picking us up. I really appreciate it. My car broke down this morning and my babysitter canceled and I'm starting a new job today and I couldn't have made it without this. The words tumbled out like water from a broken dam. Emma couldn't stop them. Couldn't control them. She was rambling, she knew she was rambling, but the silence felt worse than sounding crazy. I'm heading to Westlake Industries downtown. Have you heard of it? It's this massive company. I got hired as an administrative assistant. My first real job in 2 years. I've been applying everywhere. 52 places, maybe more, I lost count, and this is the only one that called me back. I really can't lose this job. Not on my first day. She took a breath. The driver said nothing. Just drove. But something about his silence felt different than judgment. It felt like listening. So Emma kept going. My daughter, Sophie, she's 5. She's been sick for 3 weeks. The cold just won't leave. I've tried everything I can afford, but nothing's working. The daycare there, Westlake has a childcare program, They promised to take her today, and maybe once I know she's there, I'll be able to focus. Maybe I can actually do this job well enough to keep it. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. Just a glance. But it wasn't dismissive. It was present. Was there. I work at diners. Retail stores. Places that shut down without warning. You're applying, getting hired, and then suddenly the doors close and you're starting over again. It's exhausting. I'm exhausted. And I know I shouldn't be complaining to a stranger, but... She paused. Looked at Sophie. The little girl was staring out the window at the rain. Sometimes it feels like the world stopped noticing people like me. Like we become invisible. We keep moving because stopping isn't an option, but nobody sees how hard we're working just to survive. The words hung in the car. Vulnerable. Honest. Exposed. And then the driver spoke. His voice was calm. Not loud. Just calm in a way that filled the entire car without needing volume. Like he was used to being listened to. You seem like a woman who knows the value of small steps. Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She waited for him to continue. Desperate doesn't always mean weak. Sometimes the people with the least cushion are the ones carrying the heaviest loads. Something in his words made Emma's eyes sting. Not with tears exactly. Just with the recognition of being truly seen. Of someone actually hearing what she'd said instead of just waiting for her to stop talking. They drove through the city in silence after that. The rain continued. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a rhythm that felt almost hypnotic. Then Sophie coughed again. Emma automatically reached for her water bottle and handed it to the little girl, whispering an apology as if she could apologize for her daughter's illness. I've tried every medicine I could afford, Emma said quietly. The cold keeps coming back. The driver was silent for a moment. Then, my sister's child struggled with the same kind of cough. Warm air and patience usually do more than medicine ever can. There was something in his tone. Understanding. Not pity. Understanding. And for the first time that morning, Emma felt the knot in her chest loosen just slightly. The SUV continued through the city. Through gray buildings and wet streets. Through a world that usually didn't stop to notice her. But this driver had stopped. This driver was listening. And neither of them knew that this moment, this ordinary ride through the rain, was about to become the most extraordinary moment of Emma's life. The city blurred past the windows of the black SUV. Gray buildings. Wet streets. Pedestrians hunched under umbrellas, moving through their Monday morning like everyone else in the world who had somewhere to be and something to lose if they didn't make it. Emma clutched her phone. She was going through her mental checklist. Documents, check. Her ID, check. HR paperwork in the battered envelope, check. Everything depended on today going right. Everything. Sophie had stopped coughing for the last few minutes. She was staring out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, her small hand holding the torn rabbit against her chest like it was armor. The driver navigated the city with a calm certainty. Never rushing. Never panicking. Just knowing where to go. How to get there. Like he'd made this drive 1,000 times before. 22 minutes had passed since Emma got into the car. 22 minutes of nervous talking, of a stranger listening, of feeling seen for the first time in what felt like forever. And then the towering glass building appeared through the rain. Westlake Industries. The structure gleamed even under the storm, tall enough to make anyone feel small. Powerful. Important. The kind of place where important people made important decisions that affected thousands of lives. And Emma was supposed to work there. Starting today. The black SUV slowed as it approached the entrance. The driver guided the car smoothly to the curb and came to a gentle stop. They had arrived. Emma's stomach fluttered with nerves. This was it. The moment she had been fighting toward all morning. The moment everything was supposed to start changing. She looked down at her phone to confirm the ride and add a tip. $2. That's all she could spare. $2 for a man who had listened to her pour out her life story. But when she looked at her screen, confusion rippled through her. No driver was listed. No trip history. Nothing. Just a blank gray screen and a message that read, "No current ride." Emma's fingers froze. She looked at the app again. Refreshed it. Still nothing. The Uber app was completely empty, as if the ride she'd just taken had never happened. Her heart began to beat faster. Something was wrong. She looked up at the man behind the wheel. Through the rearview mirror, she met his eyes for the first time. Really met them. Not just a glimpse. A full, steady gaze. He turned slightly in his seat. Not completely toward her. Just enough to let her see his face. Just enough to show he was about to say something important. "There's no mistake," he said quietly. His voice still calm. Still measured. but different now. More deliberate. This wasn't an Uber. The words didn't compute at first. Emma stared at him. This is my car, he continued. I stopped for you on the street. For a long heartbeat, Emma didn't move. She didn't breathe. The world seemed to slow down. She stared at him, and slowly the pieces of what he was saying began to slot into place. The expensive leather. The tailored suit. The way he drove like he owned the city. The way he spoke like someone used to being listened to. She hadn't called an Uber. She'd never been on an Uber. She'd gotten into a stranger's car thinking it was a rideshare, and she'd spent 22 minutes telling this man, this complete stranger, everything about her broken life. Heat rushed to her face. Humiliation flooded through her like a fever. I'm so sorry, Emma stammered. The words tumbled out frantically. I saw the black SUV and I checked the app and I thought, I must have misunderstood. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you correct me? The man's expression softened slightly. The corner of his mouth almost curved into a smile. There was no mockery in his face. No judgment. Just a kind of gentle understanding. I didn't want to embarrass you, he said simply. You looked like you needed a ride. I was headed to the same building anyway. I figured it was easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. Emma felt her throat tighten. She couldn't decide if she should laugh or cry. Both emotions were fighting for control at the same time. She just poured her heart out to a complete stranger in a suit she couldn't afford to touch. And now she was about to walk into her new office absolutely drenched in shame. She looked down. Sophie was still holding the torn rabbit, looking confused. Thank you, Emma whispered. She reached for the door handle, her hands shaking. I'm so sorry. I should go. I need to. She was scrambling. Trying to gather herself. Trying to collect Sophie and her dignity and pretend this mortifying moment hadn't just happened. But before she could push the door open, the man spoke again. And the words that came out of his mouth stopped her mid-motion. My name is Adrian Blake. Emma froze. Her hand on the door handle. Her heart suspended in her chest. I'm the CEO of Westlake Industries. The air inside the car seemed to disappear. Emma couldn't hear anything except the faint ticking of the engine and the rain against the windows. Everything else, every sound, every thought, every sense of reality, blurred into silence. She turned to look at him. And she realized in that moment that the most terrifying thing had just happened. She had no idea what came next. Adrian Blake, CEO of Westlake Industries. The words hung in the car like a sentence Emma was still trying to understand. She couldn't move. Couldn't think. The pieces of reality were scattering in her mind, all the moments from the past 22 minutes suddenly recontextualizing themselves. Every kind word he'd said. Every moment he'd listened. Every time he'd shown her patience instead of judgment. He wasn't just a stranger in a suit. He was the man with the power to end her career before it even started. Emma's voice came out as barely a whisper. This has to be a joke. Adrian shook his head slowly. His expression remained calm. Patient. Like he'd expected this exact response. It's not a joke, he said quietly. I apologize for not clarifying sooner. But I recognized your name this morning when HR sent through the new hire files. I saw your resume. And I didn't expect to find you standing in the rain with a child in your arms. He paused. Let that sink in. I stopped on instinct. Because you looked like you needed help. Emma's mind raced. He'd known who she was the whole time. He'd seen her resume. He'd made the deliberate choice to stop. The deliberate choice to listen. The deliberate choice to let her believe he was just a driver. She felt her knees weaken. She gripped the door handle to steady herself. I understand if you want to retract the offer, Emma said. The words came out hollow. Because she believed them. She absolutely believed them. I'm not what a company like yours wants representing them. I'm not. I'm not professional. I'm not polished. I just spent the last 20 minutes falling apart in front of you like some desperate, unstable. But Adrian held up his hand. Stop, he said. And there was something in that single word. A quiet authority. Not the cold command that made people shrink. But the steady tone of someone used to solving problems instead of judging them. You're right about one thing, Adrian continued. You're not what most companies want representing them. You're better. You showed me something today that I rarely see. Emma waited. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Honesty, Adrian said. Real honesty. You didn't know who I was, so you couldn't perform for me. You couldn't wear a mask. You couldn't pretend to be someone you're not. Most people spend their entire careers trying to impress me. You spent 22 minutes being exactly who you are. He turned to face Sophie. The little girl was watching him with uncertain eyes. And I want you to know something, Adrian said, speaking directly to the child. Your mother is one of the strongest people I've ever met. Do you know that? Sophie shook her head silently. Come with me, Adrian said, looking back at Emma. Both of you. I'm going to show you something. For a moment, Emma didn't move. Fear and confusion were warring inside her. But there was no malice in his voice. No judgment. Just clarity. Just certainty. She unbuckled Sophie and followed Adrian out of the car. The cold rain hit them as they stepped out. Adrian immediately opened an umbrella and held it over both Emma and Sophie as if it were the most natural thing in the world. As if the CEO of a massive corporation regularly walked single mothers and their sick children through downpours. Security at the front entrance greeted him with respectful nods. Their eyes briefly flicked toward Emma and Sophie but said nothing. No judgment. No questions. Just acceptance. They stepped into the marble lobby. Emma's reflection stared back at her from the polished floors. Damp. Nervous. Out of place. She wanted to disappear. But Adrian kept his pace slow, guiding her gently toward the elevators. He spoke as they walked, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Westlake has one of the best childcare programs in the city, he said. It's designed specifically for working parents who need peace of mind. The staff is incredible. The facility is bright, safe, and designed to make children feel like they belong. He paused as they approached the elevator. Your daughter will be downstairs in 10 minutes, in a room full of color and laughter and people who will take care of her like she matters. Because she does. Emma wanted to say something. To thank him. To apologize again. To make sense of what was happening. But the words wouldn't come. They took the elevator down to the ground floor and Adrian led them to a bright room filled with toys and laughter. A kind-faced woman knelt to greet Sophie, showing her where the toys were, where the snack table was, where the books lived. Sophie looked up at her mother, uncertain about being left behind. Emma's instinct was to hold on. To keep her close. Because that's what mothers do when they're terrified of losing something. But Adrian crouched beside Sophie and spoke to her directly. Your mother is going to be right upstairs, he said softly. His voice carried an unusual certainty, the kind that belongs to someone used to fixing problems, not creating them. She's going to have an amazing day. And you're going to have an amazing day right here. Everything is going to be fine. Somehow, his words carried enough certainty for both of them. Sophie looked at her mother. Emma nodded, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill. She kissed the top of her daughter's head and watched as the kind-faced woman took Sophie's hand and led her to a small table where children were painting. When the door closed and Sophie's laughter blended into the background sounds of the daycare, Emma turned to Adrian. She didn't know what to say. I don't deserve your kindness, she whispered. Adrian looked at her steadily. Kindness has nothing to do with deserving, he replied. Sometimes people simply do what's right when they see the chance. That's all I did. I saw you needed help and I helped you. They took the elevator up to the executive floor. Adrian led her through halls she'd imagined walking but never thought she'd actually see. The floors were polished. The light was bright. Everything was exactly as impressive and intimidating as she'd feared. Then he opened a door to a sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-washed city. The space was immaculate. Powerful. The office of someone important. And then he gestured toward an adjoining room. It was small compared to his office, but it was bright. Orderly. With a desk already waiting. A chair. A computer. Everything a new assistant would need. This is yours, Adrian said simply. Emma stood frozen. She couldn't process what she was seeing. Couldn't understand what was happening. Why? She asked. Her voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Why aren't you angry? Adrian was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the city below, the city he clearly commanded with ease. During our drive, he said slowly, you showed me something rare. Honesty. Most people wear masks in front of me. They calculate every word. They try to be impressive. But you didn't know who I was. You couldn't perform. So you simply spoke from a place of truth. He turned to face her. I value that more than any polished resume. I value that more than credentials or experience or all the things that usually matter in hiring decisions. He walked to the office door and paused. Life has a strange way of disguising opportunities as accidents, Adrian said. Maybe what you thought was a mistake this morning was actually the start of something you can't yet see. Then he was gone. And Emma stood alone in her new office, staring out at a city that had suddenly become a different place. A place where second chances actually existed. A place where kindness had shown up on a rainy morning in a black SUV. A place where the invisible woman had finally been seen. And somewhere in that moment, Emma made a decision. She was going to earn this chance. Not because she was afraid of losing it, but because Adrian Blake had believed in her when the world had forgotten she existed. And that kind of faith deserved everything she had to give. The following weeks moved like slow sunlight after a storm. Emma Carter arrived early every morning. 6:30 a.m. Sometimes 6:15. She'd step out of the subway into the pre-dawn darkness, clutching a thermos of coffee she'd made at home, because buying coffee downtown would have cost money she didn't have, and a heart still half afraid that if she wasn't vigilant, this new life would vanish. The office around her pulsed with quiet order. Screens glowed. Phones chimed. Heels clicked across polished floors. And from the corner window of his office, Adrian Blake would glance up from his meetings, a faint smile breaking the usual stillness of his face when he saw her working. He never mentioned their first encounter again. Neither did she. But the memory hung between them like the scent of rain. Unspoken. Impossible to forget. Emma learned quickly. She memorized schedules. Read reports until midnight. Organized chaos into harmony. Each small success steadied her spirit. Yet behind every task she could feel Adrian's calm guidance. Never intrusive, always precise. When she doubted herself, he would appear beside her desk. Not to criticize, but to quietly point out what she had done right before mentioning what could be better. Those moments felt less like corrections and more like faith being spoken aloud. Sophie settled into the daycare with an ease that surprised Emma. Within 2 weeks, the little girl was asking to go there. Within a month, she had friends. Within 2 months, she wasn't coughing anymore. The warm air and patience that Adrian had mentioned, he'd been right. Outside the office, the world didn't suddenly become easy. Rent was still sometimes late. The apartment was still small. But there was daycare now. Insurance. A paycheck that arrived when it was supposed to arrive. For the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to plan beyond tomorrow. She caught herself humming while washing dishes, a habit she'd forgotten she once had. She bought Sophie new shoes without feeling the weight of guilt. She let herself imagine a future that didn't look like survival. One Friday evening, as the calendar moved into late autumn, the building emptied early for a holiday weekend. Most employees were already gone, heading home or to restaurants or to lives that existed outside these glass walls. But Emma stayed behind. There was a report that needed finishing. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing urgent. But she'd promised Adrian she'd have it ready for Monday morning, and promises to Adrian Blake were not things Emma broke. She was so focused on her work that she almost didn't notice the shift in the building. A change in the air. A change in the light. She looked up from her desk and through the glass wall, she saw Adrian pacing near his window. His phone was pressed to his ear. His expression was shadowed. Different than she'd ever seen it. This wasn't the calm, measured Adrian she'd come to know. This was a man wrestling with something. Something heavy. Emma watched for a moment, not intending to intrude but unable to look away. She saw the tension in his shoulders. The way his hand clenched and unclenched. The way he looked out at the city like it was asking him questions he didn't know how to answer. Then he hung up the phone. He stood there at the window for a long moment. Just standing. Just thinking. And then his head turned. And his eyes found her through the glass. He looked at her for a moment. And something shifted. He turned and walked toward her office. Emma's heart suddenly became restless. This was different. His expression was different. Like he'd made a decision. Like he was about to share something private. "Can you spare a minute?" he asked, stopping at her doorway. "Of course," Emma said, standing immediately. "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer directly. He just gestured for her to follow him into his office. Adrian's office was exactly what you'd expect from a billionaire CEO. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Minimalist furniture. A desk that probably cost more than Emma's entire apartment. Everything designed to communicate power and control and distance. But as he sat on the edge of that expensive desk, he suddenly looked very human. Very uncertain. "I wanted to tell you something," Adrian began, speaking slowly, as if choosing each word with exceptional care. "And I've been trying to figure out the right time. But I think that time might be now." Emma waited. Her pulse was quickening. She had no idea what was coming. "The company is preparing to launch something new," Adrian continued. "A charitable division. A foundation meant to help single-parent families access education, housing, job training. Everything they need to start over." He paused. Let that sink in. And the idea didn't come from a board meeting. It didn't come from investors or consultants or market research. He looked directly at her. It came from you. From the way you talked that first morning about how hard it was to start over. About how invisible people felt when the world measured worth only by titles and luck. About how every barrier seemed impossible when you were fighting alone. Emma's breath caught. She didn't understand where this was going. I want you to help me build it, Adrian said. On company time. With full authority to shape its programs. I want you to be the architect of this foundation. Emma stared at him. Certain she'd misheard. But his expression didn't change. He was serious. I can't. She started. I'm an administrative assistant. I don't have experience with charitable foundations. I don't know how. You have the perspective no consultant could buy, Adrian interrupted gently. Your experiences are the blueprint I need. You know what families like yours need because you've lived it. Emma opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Why do you trust me with something so big? She asked. Adrian looked down at his hands for a moment. When he looked back up at her, his expression had changed. It was more vulnerable, more exposed. Because I once watched my own mother fight the same battles you're fighting now, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Emma waited for him to continue. After my father died, Adrian continued, his voice carrying the weight of memory, everything fell on her shoulders. Everything. The company was small then, nothing like what it is now. But she built it. She built it while raising me. She built it while working 18-hour days. She built it while refusing to let the world see how exhausted she was. He paused. His jaw tightened slightly. She was invisible too. Everyone saw the CEO, the businesswoman, the success. But nobody saw her sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., terrified that it wasn't enough. That I'd never be secure. That one wrong move would destroy everything. Adrian looked directly at Emma. When I saw you standing in the rain that morning, holding Sophie, refusing to give up, I saw my mother. I saw her strength. I saw her invisible struggle. Emma felt tears forming. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to be hearing this. I should have been honest with you the moment you stepped into the car, Adrian said. I knew who you were because I'd read your resume. I recognized the pattern of your life because it mirrored hers. And I stopped on instinct, because I couldn't drive past someone fighting the way she fought. He stood up from the desk. He wasn't looking away from her. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, he said. But I'm not sorry I stopped. Emma stood silent for a very long time, trying to steady the pulse in her chest. She thought of every moment since that rainy morning. The patience. The small chances. The quiet respect. The way he'd listened. The way he'd seen her. The way he protected Sophie like she was his own daughter. None of it had been manipulation. It had been grace in disguise. I'm not angry, Emma said finally. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were shining with tears. If I had known who you were that morning, I would have acted like someone else. Someone trying to impress a boss instead of just surviving a morning. And maybe honesty, even accidental honesty, was the only way either of us could truly meet. Adrian's expression shifted. Relief washed across his face like a wave. And then something happened that Emma hadn't expected. He smiled. A real smile. Not the measured expression of a CEO. But the unguarded smile of a man who had just been truly understood. You're going to change lives with this foundation, he said. We're going to change lives, Emma corrected. And as the Friday evening light faded into darkness outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, something shifted between them. Not romance. Not yet. But something deeper. Understanding. Trust. The quiet recognition that they had both been waiting for someone who would see them. And now they had found each other. The foundation came to life one day at a time. Emma didn't build it alone. Adrian was there for every meeting, every decision, every moment. But he let her lead. Truly lead. Not in the way that men sometimes do, letting women take the spotlight while they control from the shadows. But in the way that comes from actual respect. From trusting someone completely with something you care about. She met families whose stories mirrored her own. Single mothers who'd applied to 50 jobs and gotten rejected. Single fathers working 3 part-time positions and still worried it wasn't enough. People invisible to the world, carrying the heaviest loads, refusing to stop moving. And she watched their lives transform. Not overnight. Not with one miraculous gesture. But through small programs. A job training initiative. A scholarship fund. A housing assistance program that helped families escape the trap of living paycheck to paycheck. housing that gave them the stability to breathe. Adrian was present for all of it. In every meeting, in every decision, but always letting Emma lead. And something happened in that space between leadership and support. Something that neither of them had planned for. Connection deepened. Trust transformed. It started with small things. The kind of moments that seem insignificant in the moment but become the architecture of love when you look back. Late nights reviewing proposals. Both of them with cold coffee and reports spread across Adrian's desk. Emma would catch him watching her think, really think, through a problem. Not critiquing. Just watching like she was remarkable. She felt seen in a way she'd never felt before. Not despite her struggles, but with full knowledge of them. Despite, or maybe because of, the fact that he knew everything about her financial anxiety, her mother guilt, her fear that she wasn't enough. He loved her anyway. She realized this before he ever said it. Before she fully understood it herself. Shared meals became their rhythm. When both had forgotten dinner in the middle of the work, they'd order something simple and sit in his office overlooking the city. Sometimes they talked about the foundation. Sometimes they talked about their childhoods. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes with genuine ease. Sophie became part of their world too. The little girl would visit the office after daycare sometimes. And Adrian would sit on the floor with her, asking about her day, laughing at her drawings, treating her like her thoughts mattered. Sophie started calling him Adrian instead of Mr. Blake. Then one day she called him Adrian, and he corrected her gently. You can call me something different if you want to. What would feel right to you? Sophie thought hard about this. And she said, I'm going to call you Adrian now. Because that's your real name. And real names matter. Adrian had looked at Emma over Sophie's head in that moment, and Emma saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. He was imagining a future. Winter came early that year. It was a Friday evening in late November. After a long day of foundation presentations to potential donors, Emma was exhausted. Happy but exhausted. The kind of tired that comes from doing work that matters. Adrian walked her to the lobby. The building was emptying, employees heading out into their weekend, their lives beyond these glass walls. But Adrian didn't rush away. He stayed beside her. Outside through the glass doors, snow was falling. Not aggressive snow. Gentle snow. The kind that looks clean and new and like maybe the world was being given a second chance too. Adrian paused at the glass doors. He didn't open them immediately. Instead he turned to her. Watching you rebuild your life has changed how I view my own success, Adrian said. His voice was quiet. Certain. Like he'd been thinking about these words for a long time. Everything I built was supposed to be about accomplishing something. Making money. Growing the company. Winning. But watching you work on the foundation, watching you help families instead of demanding they be grateful, it's shown me something I'd forgotten. Emma waited. She could feel what was coming. Not romance exactly. Something deeper. Wealth feels empty without purpose, Adrian continued. Money is just numbers unless it changes lives. And you're reminding me what the company could actually mean. What I could actually mean. Emma felt tears forming. She didn't know why. The moment wasn't sad. You don't have to thank me, she said softly. I'm not thanking you, Adrian replied. I'm telling you that you've changed me. You've reminded me why I'm alive. He paused. The snow fell silently outside the glass. Perhaps we're simply giving each other balance, he said. Your groundedness for my reach. Your heart for my resources. Your ability to see people for my ability to provide platforms for that vision to grow. The elevator doors were directly ahead. Emma knew she could step into them. She could leave. Could go home to Sophie and process this moment. But she didn't. She stood there watching snow fall in the city that had once terrified her. The city that had swallowed her whole with its indifference. The city that suddenly felt full of possibility. Adrian reached out and took her hand. I'm scared, he said simply. I don't know if I'm the man you need. I know I'm the man you work for. I know there's a power imbalance that complicates everything. I know it's messy and complicated and probably not smart. He looked at her directly. But I also know that I don't want to imagine a future where you're not in it. Emma's breath caught. The elevator is right there, Adrian continued. You can walk away. You can stay professional. We never have to have this conversation again. I will respect whatever you choose. But I need you to know the truth. I need you to know how I see you. Emma looked at his face. This man who had stopped on a rainy morning. Who had listened when she desperately needed to be heard. Who had given her dignity when she'd felt invisible. Who had let her lead when he could have controlled. Who had shared his own wounds so she wouldn't feel alone in hers. I don't want to walk away, Emma said quietly. 1 year after that rainy morning, the foundation celebrated its first anniversary. The event drew donors, media, families whose lives had been transformed. The ballroom was full of people. Important people. Powerful people. People with money and influence and names that mattered in the city. But the room felt full of something else too. Hope. Purpose. The quiet power of people who had been given a second chance and were determined to make it matter. Adrian stood at the podium, prepared notes in front of him. He looked polished. Professional. Like the CEO he was born to be. He began his speech with the standard acknowledgments. The board. The donors. The employees who made it possible. But midway through he set aside the prepared notes. I want to tell you about the woman who taught me that leadership isn't status, Adrian said, his voice carrying through the room. It's service. He looked directly at Emma, standing near the stage with Sophie in her arms. I want to tell you about courage. Real courage. Not the kind of courage that comes from being born into privilege. But the kind of courage that wakes up every morning wondering if today is the day everything falls apart, and chooses to keep moving anyway. The room was silent. 1 year ago I stopped a car on a rainy street, Adrian continued. I thought I was stopping to help a stranger. I didn't know that I was actually stopping to save myself. He paused. The weight of his words settled into the room. This woman, Emma Carter, was given nothing but a second chance. And she's transformed it into a movement. A force that has helped thousands of families. Changed thousands of lives. He looked back at the podium. The company's brightest future began the day she mistook me for a driver. The room erupted in applause. But for Emma, the moment unfolded in slow motion. Like the quiet realization that sometimes fate uses the smallest misunderstandings to rewrite entire lives. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Adrian found her. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Sometimes you find someone who sees you. Really sees you. Past the mask. Past the pretense. Past everything you're afraid of. And when you do, words become almost unnecessary. Love, when it's real, doesn't look like the movies. It looks like Sunday breakfasts at a corner cafe where they sit for hours talking about nothing important and everything that matters. It looks like afternoons at charity sites where Adrian helps build shelves for a family's new home, and Emma watches him work, amazed that this powerful man is willing to get his hands dirty. It looks like quiet evenings where Sophie tells stories about her day, and Adrian listens like every word is a secret being trusted to him. Respect turned into affection. Affection turned into love that felt earned, not granted. Love that had been built on a foundation of seeing each other. Not the versions they wanted to be, but the messy, complicated, real versions of themselves. When Adrian finally asked her to build a life with him, he didn't do it with grand speeches or cameras. Though there had been cameras earlier that night at a charity event. But that wasn't the proposal. The proposal came later. An evening at the office balcony. The same balcony where that night in winter, he told her he couldn't imagine a future without her. The city sprawled below them. The city that had once terrified her. The city that had become their home. Everything good I've rebuilt in my life seems to carry your fingerprints, Adrian said simply. Not on one knee. Not with a ring yet, though that would come. But standing beside her, looking out at the skyline like they were partners in creating beauty from chaos. I want to keep learning from your strength every day. I want Sophie to grow up knowing that love isn't about saving someone. It's about standing beside them while they save themselves. And then celebrating when they triumph. He turned to her. Will you build this life with me? Emma didn't cry. She'd cried enough for a lifetime. Instead she smiled. A real smile. A smile that came from understanding that the invisible woman had been seen. That the desperate mother had been given dignity. That the scared girl with a sick child and a broken car had somehow ended up here. With this man. With this life. With purpose that mattered. Yes, she said simply. Not because you're rich or powerful, she added. But because you're kind in ways that money couldn't teach. Adrian kissed her then. Not passionately. But tenderly. Like every moment with her was something precious to protect. Their wedding was small. Intimate. Held in the company garden where the foundation first began. Where Emma's vision had transformed from an idea into a movement. Employees gathered. Friends. Families from the program. People who had been helped. People who had been invisible and were now shining in their own light. Strings of lights hung overhead. Not elaborate. Not extravagant. But enough to make the space feel magical without losing its authenticity. Sophie scattered petals down the aisle. Her giggle was the first music of the evening. Pure. Unself-conscious. the sound of a child who had grown up knowing she was loved. When Emma reached Adrian, he whispered something only she could hear. "The rain that brought us together has finally cleared," he said. And Emma answered with the truth that only she fully understood. Sometimes the wrong ride truly leads to the right destination. The vows they spoke were not fairy tale promises. They were acknowledgments. Real acknowledgments. Of every bruise they'd carried. Every lesson they'd learned. Every grace they'd been given. They didn't promise easy. They promised to build together. To see each other. To protect what they'd created. It wasn't the ending of struggle. It was proof that compassion can build something stronger than luck. Years passed. Years moved like pages being turned. Each one adding to the story. Sophie grew into a confident young woman. She was 7 when they married. 14 when she started volunteering at the foundation after school. 17 when she began leading workshops for younger children whose parents were struggling. She understood, in the way that children of struggle understand, that her mother's fight was not weakness. It was strength. And she wanted to pass that strength forward. The foundation expanded across cities. Not slowly. Not cautiously. But with the momentum of something that had to grow because too many people still needed it. They opened job training programs in 5 cities. Housing initiatives in 8. Scholarship funds that had sent hundreds of young people to college. Young people whose parents had never finished high school. Young people who became teachers, nurses, engineers, artists, dreamers, all because someone had believed they could. Emma became the director of the foundation. Adrian stepped back from daily corporate operations to focus entirely on philanthropy. The company they built wasn't just making money anymore. It was a force for transformation. Together they had become architects of hope. And at night, in the home they'd built together, a home big enough for Sophie, for the foundation's expanding office, for the garden where Adrian still reminded Emma to breathe on difficult days, they would talk about the families they'd helped. Not abstractly. By name. With stories. With futures they'd given back to people who had been told their futures were impossible. 10 years after that rainy morning, the foundation celebrated its anniversary. The ballroom was packed. Not with donors and media this time, though they were there. But with families. Real families. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands if you counted the people who'd been touched by the foundation's work over the decade. It was the same ballroom where Adrian had given his first speech about Emma. Where the room had erupted in applause. Where Emma had stood with Sophie in her arms and understood that sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it simply pulls up to the curb. But this anniversary felt different. This one wasn't about Emma and Adrian. This one was about legacy. Sophie walked to the podium. She was 22 years old now. A university graduate. Smart in the way that comes from growing up watching your mother rebuild everything. Wise in the way that comes from understanding that privilege isn't something you're given, it's something you're responsible for. She looked out at the crowd and began to speak. "My mother taught me something that changed my life," Sophie said, her voice carrying through the ballroom with a confidence that came from knowing her story mattered. "She taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. That asking for help isn't failure. That starting over isn't shameful. It's brave." The room was silent. 10 years ago, my mother was terrified, Sophie continued. She was terrified of failing me. Terrified that one more thing would break. Terrified that the world had already decided her life didn't matter. Sophie paused. She looked at her mother. And then a man in a black SUV reminded her that sometimes the world stops. Sometimes a stranger shows up. Sometimes one act of kindness can rewrite an entire life. She turned back to the crowd. "But here's what I've learned in the 10 years since that morning. Kindness isn't just one moment. It's a choice that compounds. It's a choice that grows. It's a choice that spreads from one person to another until suddenly, thousands of families have been touched." Sophie's voice grew stronger. "My mother and Adrian didn't just save our lives. They created a movement. They reminded the world that invisible people deserve to be seen. That desperate people deserve dignity. That second chances aren't luxuries, they're rights." She looked down at her notes, then set them aside. "And the most important thing I learned from my mother is this. Your life doesn't have to look like anyone else's plan for you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to refuse to stop moving. You just have to reach for help when you need it. And you have to pass that grace forward when you can." Sophie ended with the words that had become their family's quiet motto. The wrong ride. The right life. The applause was thunderous. But Emma barely heard it. Her eyes were on Adrian. Older now. Still watching her the same way he had that first morning. With calm faith. with quiet wonder. Like she was still the woman in the rain, still fighting, still believing that better was possible. He reached for her hand. Together they looked out at a crowd full of people who had once been invisible, now shining in their own light, now believing they deserved to shine. The rain tapped softly against the windows of the ballroom, as if the past itself were applauding. And somewhere in that sound was the echo of every road that had led them here. The broken car, the missed babysitter, the desperate morning, the wrong Uber, the man who stopped. Proof that sometimes destiny doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it simply pulls up to the curb, waiting quietly, disguised as an ordinary ride that turns out to be the journey home.